The rain came down like judgment on the night Rosalind Ashby was delivered to the great iron gates of Wycliffe Hall. She sat very straight in the borrowed carriage, her gloved hands folded so tightly in her lap that the seams bit into her fingers, and she watched the black shape of the house rise out of the storm like something that had been waiting for her a long while. Candlelight bled gold through 100 tall windows. Somewhere beyond the drumming of the rain, a clock was striking, slow and deep, and each stroke seemed to fall against her ribs. 30 nights. She had counted them 1,000 times on the road, and now the first of them stood open before her like a door she could not close. She had not wept. She was proud of that. In the small, cold way a person clings to whatever dignity remains when everything else has been sold. 3 days earlier, she had stood in her father's ruined study in the market town of Havershill, the ledgers open like wounds upon the desk, and she had listened to a stranger in a dark greatcoat explain, in a voice like the closing of a vault, exactly what he required of her. The Duke of Wycliffe would settle every debt the Ashby name carried. He would silence the creditor who had come to the house with his men and his threats. He would give her father back his good name, and her young sister Prudence back the possibility of a future. In exchange, Rosalind would come to Wycliffe Hall for 30 nights, and for 30 nights she would play the part of the woman he intended to marry. She did not understand yet why a duke should need to purchase a bride he had no wish to keep. She only understood that a footman was opening the carriage door, and the rain was in her face, and there was no road back to Havershill that did not lead through this one. The doors of Wycliffe Hall swung inward before she reached them, and he was there at the top of the steps, waiting, and the first thing she noticed was that he did not hurry. Other men would have come down into the rain to hand a lady up. The Duke of Wycliffe stood beneath the shelter of the portico with his hands behind his back and let her climb to him, and when she reached the top, breathless and dripping, he looked at her the way a man looks at a ledger he has already balanced. He was younger than she had imagined, and harder. A long, unsmiling face, dark hair pushed back from a high brow, and eyes the exact grey of the storm behind her. Across the back of his right hand ran a scar, pale and puckered, curling from wrist to knuckle. She saw it because he wore no glove there, as though the hand had long since stopped caring what the world thought of it. "Miss Ashby," he said, just her name. He did not welcome her. He turned and walked into his house, and she understood she was meant to follow, and she followed, because that was the bargain, and a bargain was the only thing she had left to keep. That first night she barely saw the house. Only a bewildering procession of dark corridors, portraits of dead Wycliffes watching her pass, a supper laid in a dining room so long that the two of them sat marooned at opposite ends of a river of white linen, saying nothing. He ate little. He drank less. Once she looked up and found his grey eyes already on her, and something moved in her chest, sudden and unwelcome, before he glanced away, when at last a grave housekeeper named Mrs. Fenn showed her to a bedchamber warm with firelight. Rosalind sat on the edge of the great bed and pressed her mother's silver locket to her lips, the way she had every night since her mother died, and she told herself she would survive this the way she had survived everything else. She did not yet know that somewhere below her, in a cold study, a man was standing at a window watching the rain, turning that same scarred hand over and over, remembering the war. She learned the shape of him slowly, the way one learns a house in the dark. He rose before dawn and rode out alone across the moor in all weathers, returning muddied and silent. He spoke to his servants in clipped, exact sentences and was obeyed without a raised voice. He was, she gathered from the frightened whispers of the housemaids, a man the whole county feared, the cold Duke of Wycliffe, who had shut himself away for 3 years, who never danced, never laughed, never dined in company. He had gone for a soldier once, they said, a cavalry officer in the Peninsular campaign against Bonaparte, and his younger brother had ridden out to Spain after him, and only one of them had come home, the Duke, with a saber's scar curled across his hand and a heart to match. After that, he had put away the world, and now, inexplicably, he had bought himself a bride. On the 3rd night she discovered why. She had lost her way returning from the library and heard, through a half-open nursery door, the small voice of a child crying. Inside, in a cot near the fire, a little girl of perhaps 4 years old sat clutching a threadbare rabbit, her face swollen with weeping, and no one had come to her. Rosalind did not stop to think whether it was permitted. She crossed the room and gathered the child up and held her, murmuring the old soft nonsense her own mother had once murmured, and the little girl clung to her neck and shuddered and slowly went quiet. That was how the Duke of Wycliffe found them. His ward, his dead brother's orphan daughter, Amelia, asleep at last against the breast of the stranger he had purchased. He stood in the doorway with the candle shaking very slightly in his ungloved hand, and for the first time the grey of his eyes was not cold at all. It was terror and it was hope, and he did not know she could see both. "There is a hearing at the Michaelmas Court," he said, low, so as not to wake the child. "My late brother's widow's family means to take her from me. A recluse, a cripple, a man unfit, they will say, to raise a gentle girl, a man alone." He looked at the sleeping child as though she were the only warm thing left in the world. "They will not take a married man's household, a settled house with a mistress in it, and a child loved." His jaw tightened. "That is what I have bought, Miss Ashby. 30 nights of a house that appears to have a heart. Do not mistake it for one." She should have felt used. Instead, laying the sleeping child gently back among her blankets, Rosalind felt the first thin crack open in the wall she had built against him, because a man does not ride into cannon fire for a ledger, and no ledger keeps a scar it cannot afford. She said nothing, but when she left the nursery, she did not go straight to bed. She stood a long moment in the dark corridor, her hand pressed flat to the cold panelling, listening to him settle the child's blankets in a voice she had not known he owned. The days built themselves into a fragile new order. She was to be seen. That was the arrangement, so she was seen. She walked the frost-stiffened gardens on his arm when the neighbouring gentry rode by, her hand resting in the crook of his elbow, and she felt the warmth of him even through wool and glove, and she despised herself a little for noticing it. At dinner, they no longer sat at opposite ends of the table. He had, without a word, ordered her place moved to his right hand, and now their sleeves nearly touched, and the silences between them grew somehow fuller than any conversation. She began to fill them. She asked him about the horses. He answered in 3 words. She asked again the next night, and he answered in 10. By the end of the first week, she asked him about his brother, and he set down his glass and was silent for so long that she thought she had ruined everything. And then he told her, in a voice scraped bare, about a boy who had laughed too loudly and ridden too fast and never once feared anything, and how the house had been silent since. When he finished, he looked almost angry, as though she had reached into him and taken something without leave. She wanted to cover his scarred hand with her own, She folded her hands in her lap instead, and the wanting stayed with her long after the candles guttered, an ache she had no name for and no right to. Little Amelia became the country between them where they could safely meet. The child had decided, with the fierce whole certainty of the very young, that Rosalind belonged to her now, and she followed her everywhere on small stubborn feet, and Rosalind taught her the names of the winter birds and how to press her cold hands to the window glass to watch the ghost of her own breath. The Duke would come upon them in the mornings, Rosalind cross-legged on the nursery floor, undignified, laughing, the child's dark curls under her chin. And he would stop in the doorway, and something would cross his hard face and be ruled away again before it could be read. One grey afternoon, Amelia took his ruined hand in both of her small ones, uninvited, and traced the scar with a fingertip and said gravely, "Does it hurt?" And the fearsome Duke of Wycliffe, who had buried a brother and frightened a county, knelt down on the nursery floor and answered a 4-year-old with a tenderness that made Rosalind turn to the window so he would not see her face. "Not anymore," he told the child, "not anymore." But Rosalind, watching the frost on the glass, understood he was lying, and understood too that she was no longer entirely certain whose wound she was thinking of. There was, of course, a serpent in the garden. Her name was Lady Cassandra Vaughan, and she arrived on the 12th day in a carriage lacquered like a jewel, with a mother in tow, and a claim upon the Duke stitched into every practised smile. There had been an understanding once before he went away to the war. Everyone knew it. The beautiful Lady Cassandra had all but been promised the running of Wycliffe Hall, and she had not come all this way in the cold to find a merchant's daughter installed at the Duke's right hand. She was flawless, and she was cruel in the particular way of women who have never once been refused. Over tea, she praised Rosalind's gown as so brave, so unexpected, so very much its own, until every lady in the room understood it for the insult it was. She asked with wide, wounded eyes whether it was true the Ashbys had been quite ruined, quite entirely, and whether it was not the most romantic thing that dear Wycliffe had taken such an interest in a family so far beneath his notice. Rosalind sat with her spine like a poker and her cheeks burning and said nothing that could shame the man whose bargain she was keeping. But under the table, unseen, the Duke's scarred hand found hers where it lay clenched in her skirts and closed over it and held it hard and did not let go until Lady Cassandra had swept out into the cold. Neither of them spoke of it. Neither of them let go quite as quickly as propriety required. And when Rosalind lay awake that night, she could still feel the exact shape of his fingers against hers, and she was afraid, truly afraid now, because a bargain has an ending written into it, and she had begun to dread the arithmetic of the days. The county was to hold its winter ball on the 20th night, at Wycliffe Hall itself, and it fell to Rosalind to be the mistress of it. This was the great performance, the whole purpose of the purchase. The ton assembled beneath the chandeliers to see, with their own eyes, that the cold Duke had a warm and settled house, so that word of it would reach the ears of the court, and no one would dare call his fitness into question. For a week, the great hall was thrown open and scoured and dressed. Rosalind, who had grown up counting every candle, found herself commanding hundreds of them. She had not danced in 3 years, since before her family's fall. And one evening, the Duke came upon her in the empty ballroom, moving alone through the steps of a half-remembered waltz, her eyes shut, her arms held out to a partner who was not there. She froze when she saw him. He did not laugh. He crossed the long floor without a word and took the empty place her arms had made. one hand at her waist, the scarred hand closing warm around her bare fingers, for she had removed her gloves to dust the sconces, and there was no time to be scandalized, and no one to be scandalized by it. There was no music. There was only the rain against the tall dark windows and the sound of their own breathing, and he turned her slowly across the silent floor, looking down at her as though she was something he had found and did not know how to say he wished to keep. When the imaginary music ended, neither of them stepped back. His thumb moved once, slowly, across her knuckles. She felt it everywhere. "I did not intend this," he said very low, and she did not ask what he meant, because she knew, and because if either of them named it aloud, the days would begin their cruel counting again, and there were only 10 nights left. She should have guarded her heart more fiercely. She knew better than any woman living what it cost to want above one's station. But that was the trouble with slow things. By the time you feel them, they are already through you. She caught herself smiling at nothing over her needlework. She began to listen for his boots on the stair. When he returned, muddied from the moor, she found she could not rest until she had seen with her own eyes that he was whole. And one night, sitting up late over the household accounts because it soothed her to be useful, she looked up to find him watching her from the doorway with the firelight in his grey eyes, and neither of them said a word, and she understood with a slow, terrible certainty that she had stopped playing the part of a woman who loved the Duke of Wycliffe some considerable time ago. Then the ball came, and everything she feared arrived with the guests. The great hall of Wycliffe blazed as it had not blazed in 3 years. 1,000 candles doubled in the tall dark glass, silk and satin turning under the light, the first true music the house had heard since the war. Rosalind stood at the Duke's side in a gown the colour of deep winter roses, and for a handful of hours she let herself believe the lie was true. He led her out for the opening set before the whole assembled county, and though he moved with the faint stiffness the war had left him, he never once looked at anyone but her, and she saw the whispers ripple outward. The cold Duke transformed, the fearsome Duke of Wycliffe. In love, she was almost happy. That was the danger of it. That was always the danger. Lady Cassandra had not come to be forgotten. She waited until the room was fullest, until every ear in the county was near, and then she brought forward a gentleman Rosalind knew at once, though she had prayed never to see him again. A heavy, smiling man with cold eyes and rings on every finger. Sir Josiah Marchmont, the very creditor whose debts the Duke had paid. The man who had come to the house in Havershill with his threats and his appraising stare. The man from whom this whole bargain had been meant to save her. He had not forgiven the loss of what he considered his. And in a voice pitched to carry, silken with false regret, he told the assembled ton exactly what Rosalind Ashby was. Not a lady. A merchant's ruined daughter, bought and paid for. He had the figure, he named it, installed at Wycliffe Hall under a false betrothal to deceive the court. A woman living unwed beneath a duke's roof for money. The music faltered. The room turned. 100 faces she had spent 20 nights charming curdled all at once into that particular society cruelty that is worse than any blow. And Rosalind felt the floor tilt beneath her satin slippers and knew that with a single sentence she had been unmade before them all. She looked at the Duke. Everything hung upon what he would do. One word from him, one cold disavowal, one shrug. She was nothing to me, a servant, a mistake, and his own name would be saved, his fitness unquestioned, the child kept, the bargain honoured to its letter and no more. She had been bought for 30 nights, and this was the price of the 20th. her ruin for his safety. She saw the calculation available to him, plain as the scar on his hand. She lifted her chin and prepared to bear it, because she was proud, and because she loved him, and because she would not let them see her break. The Duke of Wycliffe stepped forward into the silence, and he took her bare hand in his scarred one, and he raised it deliberately before them all. "You are correct in every particular but one," he said, and his cold voice carried to the farthest candle. "I did pay this man's price to bring Miss Ashby under my roof. I told myself it was for my ward. I told myself it was a bargain." His grey eyes did not leave Rosalind's face. The whole glittering county might have been so much furniture. "I was a liar and a coward and a fool, for it was never a bargain, and she was never bought. A man cannot buy what she has given me freely, which is the first warmth this house has known since I came home from the war without my brother. I would sooner surrender the whole of Wycliffe than surrender her, and any man in this room. Now, at last, he turned, and the storm was in his face. Who names her anything but the woman I intend before God to marry may take it up with me directly, and Sir Josiah Marchmont may begin." No one moved. Sir Josiah's smile came apart, and Rosalind, standing in the ruin she had expected and the rescue she had not, felt the tears she had refused for 20 nights spill over at last, because he had not chosen the ledger. He had chosen her before them all, with his ruined hand around her bare one, and his good name laid down at her feet like a cloak over a puddle. He drew her against him, there beneath the blazing chandeliers, and bent his dark head, and asked her, quietly, only for her, the fearsome Duke gone soft as candlelight, whether she would have him. Not for 30 nights, for all of them there were. She could not speak. She pressed the answer into his coat with her whole trembling body, and his arms closed around her as though he had been cold for 3 years and had only just come in from the rain. They were married before the frost broke, in the small stone church at the edge of the estate, with little Amelia scattering the last of the winter's hothouse petals down the aisle and getting them mostly upon her own shoes. The county came. Of course the county came. There is nothing the Tun loves so well as the love story it tried to strangle in its cradle. And Lady Cassandra sent a very cold and very correct note of congratulation, and then married a Viscount in Bath. And Sir Josiah Marchmont was not received anywhere in 3 counties again, which is its own kind of justice. When the Michaelmas court sat at last, it looked upon a duke with a wife who loved his child, and a child who ran to them both, and it did not take Amelia anywhere. She stayed. She grew up at Wycliffe with the run of the moor her father rode, and a mother who had once held her through the dark on the 3rd of 30 nights. And she never knew, until she was very old herself, that any of it had begun as a bargain. The long-shuttered rooms of Wycliffe Hall were thrown open again that spring, and the neglected gardens beyond them coaxed back to life. Rosalind had asked him for it, gently, one morning over the accounts, not to erase the years he had lost, but to fill the silence they had made. And he had looked at her for a long moment, and then given the order himself, and stood beside her in the rising dust of it, with his scarred hand wrapped warm around her bare one, watching light come back into the part of the house that had been dark so long. There were more children in time, and more candles, and the sound of the place changed entirely. The servants no longer whispered of the cold Duke, for there was no cold Duke any more. Only a man who came in muddied from the moor, and lifted his children over his head, and kissed his wife in the corridor where anyone might see. Propriety be damned, he never wore a glove on the ruined hand again. He said he had no reason to hide it from a house that loved him, and she had made it a house that loved him, and that was the whole of the miracle. Years on a golden autumn evening with the light lying long and warm across the estate lawn, Rosalind sat on the terrace steps of Wycliffe Hall and watched her husband walk up from the stables with their youngest asleep on his shoulder, and she pressed her mother's silver locket to her lips out of the old habit of gratitude. He climbed the steps to her and sat, and without a word, he took her bare hand in his scarred one and turned it over and pressed his mouth to her open palm, the way he had 100 times, the way he would 100 more. She had come to this house one storming night with nothing left to sell but 30 of her nights, certain that love was a thing above her station and forever out of reach. She had been so sure her fate was already written. She had been so wrong. Everything she had feared she would lose, she had found. Everything she had counted as an ending had only ever been a door she had not yet dared to open. And so I ask you, my dear listener, wherever you are as this fire burns low, if you had arrived, proud and frightened, at the gates of a cold, closed house you were certain could never love you, would you have had the courage to reach for the ruined hand that reached, at last, for yours? Would you have counted the nights until they ended, or dared to hope they never would? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in Rosalind's place, and whether you believe, as I do, that the coldest hearts are only the ones that have loved too fiercely once and been left in the dark. If this story warmed you tonight, stay a while longer by the fire with me, subscribe, and let us turn the page together to the next forbidden love the Tun would never have allowed. I shall be waiting for you just here when the candles are lit again.